Bob Ferguson, of course, came out on the campaign trail in his inaugural address everywhere, and he said, my biggest priority, my campaign promise to you is that I want to get $100 million in the budget to go toward new police officers. And that's how he sold it. That's how he sold it the entire time. But it turns out that's not what the bill does at all. This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration, Lord knows we've got it, into action at future42.org. Make sure you sign up for their newsletter. So just as a reminder, one of Bob Ferguson's very first ads when he was running for governor was this one.
50th, dead last. Washington has the lowest number of law enforcement officers per capita of any state. That's unacceptable. As governor, I'll fix it.
Yeah, okay. As governor, I'll fix it. Well, what are you going to do? Now, I said after that ad, after he made the same promise in his inaugural address, that this is not a problem you can throw money on. We didn't get to this position overnight where people don't want to be a cop in Washington state. It took years and years of degrading our law enforcement professionals, Bob Ferguson and his office politically prosecuting police officers for murder, Seattle and the rest of the progressives around the state pushing police defunding. It took a very long time to get to a place where the city of Seattle is 600 to 700 officers short. So much so they're having press conferences to celebrate when they hire one plus officer in a whole year. Like, oh, this is the first year we've hired more officers than have left. So things are bad. And I've said that respect is the biggest currency that's going to get us out of this situation. Making law enforcement officers believe and truly having their back and respecting the difficult job that they do, and not using your power and influence and lawmaking ability to hinder their ability to keep our communities safe. It doesn't mean you let them go out there and run rampant, right? There have to be some regulations and rules and expectations, and nobody disagrees with that, but the vilification has to stop. And also, we have to have leaders with a track record of not vilifying officers, of having their back. Bob Ferguson blows with the wind. One day he's prosecuting unsuccessfully police officers for murder. The next day he's running a campaign ad as governor saying that he's going to help hire more cops. And we called it, you guys called it too, all along. Is like, no, he'll leave office. We'll still be last in the nation for police officers per capita. But he made the promise anyway. And at the end of the day, if you're a police officer and you're going to work in a state like Washington that doesn't respect you, you might as well get more money, right? So on the surface, fine. I don't believe Bob Ferguson. I don't believe he respects law enforcement. But if he wants to set aside $100 million in the budget to be able to bring more law enforcement officers into our communities, which we desperately need, then by all means, I guess. Let's just understand who it's coming from. So the vessel for that policy was House Bill 2015 to actually push through the policy and the grant program, what it will look like, what the requirements will be. So Bob signed that law into law today. And of course, he used it to take a victory lap on fulfilling a key campaign promise. Here he is this morning.
In my inaugural address, I made a promise that this legislative session, we must provide significant funding to hire more law enforcement officers in our state. We ranked last, 50th per capita in number of law enforcement officers. That needs to change. I pledge to work with both sides of the aisle to ensure this critical funding made it through the legislature. I'm so pleased to have House Bill 2015 before me now to help address this situation.
Okay. So, again, if you are a passive news consumer, what have you heard? You've heard Bob make this promise on the campaign trail. You've heard Bob make this promise during his inaugural address. And you'll probably hear on the evening news tonight, Bob giving a speech, patting himself on the back with a few uniformed members of law enforcement around him. So that's what you'll hear as a passive news consumer. And so what will you believe then as a passive news consumer? Well, you'll believe that Bob Ferguson supports law enforcement. He wants our communities to be more safe. And he's helped get $100 million to hire more police officers. Only to find out that that's not true. That's not what the bill does. In fact, we have now learned, and again, I take blame for this. I don't know why I didn't know this sooner, because I've been harping on this already, but I would have been harping on it to a much larger extent for the past few months. So it turns out that the way this grant program is structured, there is no guarantee in it that even a penny of the $100 million goes to hiring police officers. Listen to me sound like I'm surprised. Listen to me sound like I'm surprised. This is the problem, Brandy. Why are you surprised? You should have been skeptical to begin with. So the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs was the first sort of indication that I got that this wasn't what it was being sold as. So they put out in a press release, I'll just read part of it for you. While we recognize the positive elements of House Bill 2015, it is not, quote, $100 million for law enforcement hiring. In its final form and after many revisions, it would actually allow the full $100 million to be spent without hiring a single new officer. If a community chooses to implement a local sales tax increase allowed by this bill, hiring may include not only law enforcement officers and behavioral health professionals, but also devote funds to emergency management planning, environmental hazard mitigation, security personnel, community outreach and assistance programs, alternative response programs, and mental health crisis response. The legislation also requires applicants to comply with reporting and training programs that have not even been implemented by the state. So I saw that and I said, what? How did I miss that? So I looked back at the bill, and as they said, there's been a lot of revisions in the legislature. So engrossed substitute House Bill 2015, indeed, if you read the whole thing. So it says it's a grant program for the purpose of providing direct support to local and tribal law enforcement agencies in hiring, retaining, and training law enforcement officers, peer counselors, and behavioral health personnel working in co-response to increased community policing and public safety. Peer counselors? Look, I'm not saying there's not a place for peer counselors and behavioral health personnel, but that's not what this was sold as. This was sold as hiring cops. There's a big difference between a cop with a gun who can respond to a life and death emergency and a peer counselor. And there is no, for cities, and this gets worse, there is no for cities any requirement that, hey, this much of the grant has to be spent towards a police officer versus a peer counselor or a behavioral health professional or whatever it might be. No, they can get the money and turn around and just hire peer counselors. Or as the Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs said, use it on emergency management. Any number of things. So that's part of the lie. Here's the other part. So it has this long list of things that you have to do to qualify for it. One of them is this. To qualify for a grant pursuant to this section, a law enforcement agency must have received funding from a sales and use tax authorized pursuant to Section 201 of this act before awarding the grant. Yeah, a city or county has to pass a special increase in the sales tax. So it's sort of like, you pass the tax, you put some funding in, we'll give you some funding as well. So the grant is contingent on increased taxes, which that wasn't the deal. That wasn't sold to anyone. It says the rate of the tax under this section would have to equal 0.1% of the selling price. Monies received from the tax imposed under this section must be expended for criminal justice purposes. So you've got to have this new tax that's funding criminal justice purposes very broadly, and then you can supplement that with this grant. It's nuts. And the other aspect of it, too, that I think is very important that the Criminal Justice Training Commission pointed out is that it requires applicants to comply with reporting and training programs that have not been implemented by the state. So in reading some of them, and again, it's a long list. I don't have a graphic for this, Nicole. I'm just going to read through it because there's just so much here. Where they said that to qualify for the grant. So it's this long list of things you have to do to qualify. So you have to issue and implement policies and practices consistent with the Office of the Attorney General's Keep Washington Working Act guide, which of course is the sanctuary policies. So you have to blatantly be in violation of federal law as a law enforcement agency to get this grant. You have to issue and implement policies and practices regarding use of force and de-escalation tactics. Again, tactics that are best practices, not necessarily even state law. 25% of your officers have to have completed the commission's 40-hour crisis intervention team training. And 100% of your officers have to be compliant with a requirement to complete trauma-informed, gender-based violence interviewing, investigation, response, and case review training. So what is this all about? Well, it's about helping out the Criminal Justice Training Commission money. But it's also about these grants only going to law enforcement agencies that are willing to abide by what the progressives want law enforcement to be. So what, like Seattle? Olympia? So unless you're doing every single thing the far left wants you to do as a law enforcement agency, not even stuff that you're required to do by state law, but their wish list of training and de-escalation and race-based, gender-based, whatever it is, you're not going to see a dime of this money. So, anyone east of the Cascades, you can forget your community getting any of this grant money for additional law enforcement. This is nuts, you guys. And again, I will take full responsibility for it, for not having done this segment I'm doing right now 3 months ago. And I know that it's undergone some revisions. I don't know how it went under my radar. I'm kind of ashamed of it, to be honest. But now Bob Ferguson gets to trot out there, say he's fulfilled his chief campaign promise to fund law enforcement to make our communities less safe. 80% of the state will just believe that, the passive news consumers. And he'll get to hang his hat on that like he's pro-cop. And at the end of this, we might not even have a single new police officer funded with this money. It's just going to fund progressive wish list items again. I mean, what a slap in the face. And every time I think I can't possibly be more disappointed with him and disappointed with Democrats and progressives for their lying and their gaslighting, something like this. I mean, something we genuinely need, and that should be a nonpartisan issue. Like, we need more police officers. Things are not good right now. It's taken like 8-9 minutes in some areas to respond to life or death emergencies. Imagine being raped actively. Getting a call off to 911, it takes them 9 minutes to respond. And now they want to act, Bob wants to act like he's helping fix that through this bill? When it doesn't do that at all, we're going to end up with a bunch of peer counselors who are peer counselors in gender-based violence interviewing. We're not going to end up with cops with guns and badges on the street saving lives. One of the most disgusting things that came out of this session, the lies that were perpetrated on this. Absolutely, absolutely unbelievable. That segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. And I guess a good step on this would be to email Bob Ferguson's office and let him know that that this is not what he has been promising. That this is not $100 million for law enforcement officers. So you let him know that I know, and that I told you, and that you know, and that you're going to tell your friends so they know too. So we don't let him get away with this.